Now, for more perspective on Huawei's current position globally, I'm joined live from New York by Daniel Levin, member of the board at the Liechtenstein Foundation for State Governance. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, thank you.
So let's start with this latest reprieve that was given to Huawei. Why was it extended again?
Well, it was extended. First of all, there are three elements to a reprieve. You have the Commerce Department that extended it yesterday, which is primarily intended not just for Huawei's benefit, but actually for the benefit of U.S. companies that supply Huawei with products, with chips, semiconductors, and operating platforms. So I'm not so sure this is intended really to generate much goodwill on Huawei's side as much as it is intended for a domestic audience. This is as opposed to the possible ban with the FCC issued by the Federal Communications Commission that is possible that will come up this Friday, as well as congressional action that is being taken on the legislation front. So I'm not so sure this is really much of a reprieve, and I think Huawei also views it that way.
Indeed, and we did see that Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said that one of the main purposes of the reprieve was to help ensure telephone service in rural communities, many of whom rely on Huawei services. Why is that market important enough to warrant a reprieve?
Well, first of all, I think that that's not quite accurate what he said, because the Commerce Department's reprieve is really intended more for U.S. companies that want to continue to supply to Huawei, whereas the FCC is the one this coming Friday that will, in all likelihood, ban the acquisition by rural providers that get federal subsidies that are intended to expand broadband in underserved areas to purchase Huawei equipment. So, in fact, what has happened is that yesterday's action by the Commerce Department intended to help U.S. companies, whereas the FCC's likely ban this coming Friday is going to directly hurt Huawei. The idea is that there is a political issue that you have about 40 ISP providers in rural areas that have relied heavily on Huawei equipment for its 5G network. And this is not just about communications and smartphones. This is about everything that deals with cars, with irrigation systems, with rural agriculture, and so on, that is very reliant on this technology. So it does have a lasting effect, in particular as we're approaching the upcoming elections in areas that do have considerable electoral powers, also red states that have that power.
Now let's also look at Huawei itself. How is all this uncertainty over Huawei's future in the US and its US components, as well as this Google ban, how is all this actually affecting the company's sales?
Well, I think it's definitely affecting its smartphone sales outside of China. Inside China, Huawei has increased its sales pretty dramatically. I mean, the entire Chinese market has increased in the last quarter 30% over last year, and Huawei's sales have increased with that. Commensurately, has over 40% of the Chinese market in smartphones. But internationally, in particular in the smartphone area, it's very difficult for providers, manufacturers that don't work on either Apple or Google Play platforms to get international carriers to accept it. Even Microsoft couldn't do it with his Windows Phone, and BlackBerry couldn't do it. So if Huawei is going to compete internationally on the smartphone market, it's going to be difficult to do that without access to the Google platform here. Whereas in China, of course, it has a dominant position, it's going to continue to do that. On the other hand, on the 5G market, I don't think it's going to impact it negatively long term for a number of reasons. One is because Huawei, together with ZTE, Ericsson, and Nokia, are the leaders, and Huawei in itself, the largest and the most sophisticated player in this market. And also because I think that the Trump administration's standing internationally among allies has been weakened, because it's no longer viewed with the same commitment as the U.S. has been viewed perhaps for the last 70 years. So countries that have been pressured historically, and now for the last year or two, to cut off ties with Huawei, are looking at it again and saying, first of all, I'm not sure how reliable the U.S. is an ally. You can just ask the Kurds in Syria about that. And secondly, I think they also worry that President Trump will use Huawei as a trade ship and perhaps throw it into the ring and take it off the entity list, and then all those countries will be left in the dark because they follow the U.S. lead.
So then, Daniel, how much impetus has this given Huawei and other big tech companies to really shore up relations in other markets, and which ones do you think offer the most promise?
I think that I think we have to be a little bit careful here. I think the expansion into other markets was in part what caused the problem between the U.S. and Huawei here, in particular with the arrest of the CFO in Canada and the expansion into the Iranian market. Whereas I think that what has happened, and is a net positive for Huawei, is that put on this list has accelerated the self-reliance on chips and semiconductor manufacturing in-house, as well as operating platforms such as HiSilicon and the new Harmony operating system here. So I think these are the unintended consequences of putting on a ban. So I wouldn't so much focus on the expansion in other markets. Certainly it will happen in the 5G network area. I'm not so sure what will happen in the smartphone space in the immediate future. But what will increase is the development in-house in the products in order to make Huawei self-reliant. And we do see that already, and it's obviously being compensated also internally.
Daniel Levin there, board member at the Liechtenstein Foundation for State Governance. Thanks so much.